The market sprawled endlessly beneath a burnt orange sky where the blistering sun cast a cruel light over the suffering below. Rows of cages filled the plaza, their prisoners, creatures of every imaginable form, on display like livestock. A discordant chorus echoed through the space, merchants yelling over one another, boasting about the value of their stock. Metal clanked, muffled sobs whispered through the noise, and the stench of despair clung to every breath. In the farthest recess, hidden under deep shadow, sat a figure barely acknowledged. She was, in the eyes of her captors, among the least desirable. Her species was nearly forgotten, marked by delicate bioluminescent designs that flickered faintly whenever fear gripped her. Her arms, though fragile in appearance yet deceptively strong, were shackled in oversized restraints that dwarfed her frame. Her spirit had been crushed long ago, and now she sat motionless, head lowered. The glow of her patterns faded to a dull, sickly tone. No one made offers. No one even slowed to look, until he arrived. At first glance, the man was unassuming, a human in a long coat, his features hidden beneath the broad brim of his hat. He walked with purpose, eyes scanning each cage, his face a mask of calm. Humans were a rare sight in these territories, not since the fragile peace with the Galactic Alliance had started to unravel. Yet here he was, moving confidently through a place where he could just as easily be prey. Then he saw her, and stopped. His dark eyes locked with hers, and for the first time in years, she felt something stir inside. Not hope, not quite. It was too brittle, too foreign, but it was something. The vendor approached, hands rubbing together eagerly. "Ah, a human. You've got an eye for the unusual, huh? This one's exotic. A little damaged, but one of a kind. Cheap, too." The man said nothing at first. He simply crouched, lowering himself gently as though trying not to frighten a wounded creature. She instinctively flinched, shrinking away. He paused, keeping his distance. "How much?" His voice was quiet, steady. The seller gave a nervous chuckle. "For you? A deal. 200 credits. Without a word, the man reached inside his coat, pulled out a small pouch, and tossed it to the vendor, who caught it with greedy hands. The exchange was quick, almost indifferent, like he was buying a tool, not a living being. The merchant handed over a key. "She's all yours, human. Good luck taming that one." The man stepped forward, his shadow falling over her. She braced for pain. Instead, she heard the key turn. The iron cuffs loosened and dropped to the ground. For the first time in what felt like eternity, she was free. She stared up at him, her wide glowing eyes filled with uncertainty and suspicion. He didn't touch her, didn't drag her out. He simply stepped back and asked, "Can you walk?" Her voice, long unused, came out in a broken whisper. "Why?" He tilted his head slightly. His face gave nothing away. "Because no one deserves to live in chains." It made no sense. Chains were as common in her world as air. Freedom was a foreign dream, one she'd given up long ago. Yet here was this stranger, not commanding, but offering a choice. "Come with me," he said, extending a hand. "Or stay. It's your decision." The simplicity of the words shook her. No one had ever asked what she wanted. No one had ever offered her a choice. Slowly unsure, she reached out and grasped his hand. Her legs trembled as she rose, muscles weakened by captivity. He steadied her. His touch was firm but gentle. She flinched at the contact, but didn't pull away. His hand was warm, calloused, unlike the cold cruelty she'd known. The market didn't notice their departure. Slaves came and went, bought and discarded like goods. One more alien leaving the cage meant nothing to them. But to her, each step felt like a rebellion. She didn't know where he was taking her, but the lack of chains was reason enough to follow. They wove through tight alleyways until the market's din faded behind them. Red dust clung to her feet, and the silence grew heavier with each turn. She stumbled, her body still too fragile, but he caught her every time, without complaint. Finally, they reached a small, unremarkable ship on the edge of the settlement. It was old, patched with mismatched metal, but it looked space-worthy. He paused at the ramp. "You'll be safe here," he said. She hesitated. Safety was not something she understood. She had no reason to trust him, no reason to believe, but the alternative was the market, or worse. She gave a faint nod. Inside, the ship was functional but clean. A cramped galley, worn seating, and a cockpit patched with care. He led her to a narrow back room with a cot and a thin blanket. "You can rest here," he said, stepping aside. "No one will hurt you." She lingered at the threshold, her glowing patterns flickering weakly. "Why?" she asked again. Her voice quivered. "Why are you doing this?" He leaned back against the wall, arms folded across his chest. "Does it matter?" "It does to me," she replied, surprising even herself with the courage in her tone. He regarded her for a long moment, as though weighing how much of the truth to reveal. "Let's just say I've witnessed more pain than anyone should. If I can ease a bit of that burden, I will." His words were straightforward, yet they carried a depth she couldn't quite grasp. She moved further into the room and sat at the edge of the cot, her body sinking into its unfamiliar softness. "What's your name?" he asked. She hesitated. Her captors had taken that from her long ago, replacing it with a number. She hadn't spoken it in years. "I don't remember," she lied. He nodded, as though he had anticipated that response. "Rest," he said gently. "We'll talk again when you're ready." He left her alone, closing the door quietly behind him. For the first time in memory, there was silence. No shouting, no clattering of chains, no jarring pain. Just silence. She didn't trust it. Sleep came in restless waves, disrupted by memories of the market and the faces of those who had imprisoned her. But each time she woke, she reminded herself. She was no longer there. She was on a ship with the human, in this strange, unfamiliar thing he called safety. The days that followed felt surreal. He gave her food, simple rations her body struggled to accept, and water, which she drank as if she'd been starved of it for years. He asked for nothing in return, only that she allow him to tend to her wounds and tell him if she needed anything. His kindness, offered with no expectations, unsettled her. She observed him from the shadows, trying to understand who he was. He was quiet, deliberate in his movements, spending most of his time in the cockpit or maintaining the ship's aging systems. When he spoke, his voice was steady, never raised, never irritated. But beneath that calm exterior, she noticed something else, a quiet sorrow that lingered in his eyes when he thought she wasn't looking. One evening, as the ship floated silently through the void of space, she wandered into the common room. He was there, sitting at a small table, absorbed in a datapad. When he looked up, he offered her a faint smile. "Can't sleep?" he asked. She shook her head and took a seat across from him. For a while, neither of them spoke. The silence felt oddly peaceful, but curiosity tugged at her. "What happened to you?" she asked finally. "Why do you help people like me?" He set the datapad down and leaned back in his chair. "You don't give up, do you?" She gave a slight shrug, her glowing patterns pulsing softly. "You saved me. I think that gives me the right to ask." He sighed, brushing a hand through his hair. "Fair enough." He paused, then continued. "I was a soldier once, fought in a war that wasn't mine. I saw too many people, human and alien, ripped apart because someone in power decided their lives weren't worth saving." She listened, hearing the weight behind every word. "I left when I couldn't take it anymore, tried to vanish, but no matter where I went, the suffering followed. People crushed under systems built to dehumanize them. I couldn't ignore it any longer." He looked at her then, and in his expression she saw something raw and unguarded. "That's why I helped you, because no one should be treated the way you were." Her throat tightened, and for a moment she couldn't speak. Finally she whispered, "Thank you." He nodded, as if that was all he needed. As days turned into weeks, she began to heal. Her strength returned. So did pieces of herself, fragments of memory, a name, a place that once felt like home. She shared those memories with him, and he listened without judgment. In return, she learned more about him. He wasn't just a former soldier. He was someone who had lost everything: his family, his home, his belief in humanity. Yet somehow, he had found the will to keep going, to help others, even when he had nothing left. They forged a fragile but genuine bond. He taught her how to navigate the ship, how to protect herself, how to survive in a universe that had shown her only cruelty. And in return, she gave him something he had long believed lost: hope. Their journey was far from over. The galaxy remained vast, dangerous, and unforgiving. The threat of her former captors still loomed in the distance, but for the first time in years, she felt something she thought had been stripped from her forever: freedom. And for now, that was enough. Aboard the ship, she found herself gradually reconnecting with the person she had been before her captivity. Fleeting glimpses of her previous life resurfaced, visions of her people, vivid jungles aglow with bioluminescent light, and a profound bond shared among her kind. But every recollection was laced with grief, a quiet ache, because she knew her home world had been plundered, its inhabitants either scattered or enslaved. The human never pried for more than she was willing to share. He seemed to grasp instinctively that some wounds needed time, and that some memories were too heavy to voice. Instead, he dedicated himself to teaching her the skills required for survival. One day, while she was training with a knife he had provided, a plain blade with a worn handle, he observed her from across the cargo hold. Her movements were swift and deliberate, despite the fragility that still lingered in her limbs. "You've done this before," he noted. She halted, the blade steady in her grasp. "We were hunters," she murmured. "Before everything changed, my people didn't need weapons like this, but we knew how to defend ourselves." "Why no weapons?" he asked, genuinely intrigued. She hesitated, then pointed to the faintly glowing markings on her arms. "These aren't just for decoration. They allowed us to connect with each other, with the world. We didn't need weapons because we could feel danger before it arrived." He frowned slightly. "Sounds like a gift." "It was," she replied, her voice tinged with melancholy. "Until they turned it against us, the slavers figured out how to sever that bond. They stole what made us strong." He was quiet, reflecting on her words. Then he stepped closer, extending his hand. "Let's see what you're capable of now." She blinked, caught off guard. "What?" "Show me what a hunter from your world can really do," he said with a subtle challenge in his tone. After a beat, she nodded and slipped into a defensive posture. He circled her with intent, testing her reflexes. Their sparring began slowly, each assessing the other's rhythm. His movements were clean, efficient, like a seasoned fighter. But she moved like something wild, instinctual. Despite the years of captivity, her reflexes had not dulled. It ended quickly. With a deft twist, she disarmed him, her blade resting lightly at his throat. He raised his hands in surrender, a small grin playing at his lips. "Not bad," he said. She lowered the blade, a hint of satisfaction flashing in her eyes. "You're not too bad yourself." Time passed, and she grew stronger with each day. When they docked at various ports, she started stepping outside the ship, her fear of capture gradually replaced by cautious confidence. He stayed near, always watching, but never hovering. He gave her space to reclaim her strength. One day, as they prepared to leave a bustling trade hub, something caught her attention. A cluster of cloaked figures loitered at the edge of the docking bay, their gaze fixed on the ship. Her senses flared. "We're being watched," she whispered as they boarded. He followed her line of sight, his expression darkening. "Slavers? Maybe," she said, tension in her voice. "They feel off." He didn't ask how she knew. He had learned to trust her intuition. "Strap in," he ordered, heading for the cockpit. The ship ascended smoothly, but just as they cleared the atmosphere, alarms erupted. A hostile vessel had locked onto them, its weapons hot. "Looks like someone's trying to stop us," he muttered, flipping switches and adjusting the controls. She clung to the seat, her markings flickering with anxiety. "What do we do?" "Hold on," he replied, jaw tight. "This won't be pretty." The enemy fired. He veered the ship hard, the blasts narrowly missing. She watched, heart racing, as he piloted with focused precision, dodging attacks and setting course for the nearest jump point. But their pursuers were persistent. A second blast struck the shield, sending tremors through the vessel. Sparks burst from the console, and she gasped as the lights flickered. "We're not going to make it," she yelled. "Yes, we will," he snapped. "Get to the turret, now." Without a second thought, she bolted to the gunner's seat, fastened herself in, and seized the controls. The turret swiveled beneath her hands. Her first shots missed, but she recalibrated quickly. The instincts of a hunter returned. Her next volley struck the enemy ship, damaging its propulsion. The pursuer faltered, just long enough for them to reach the jump point. He slammed the control panel, and the stars stretched into bright streaks as they leapt into hyperspace. When they emerged, a heavy silence settled over the vessel, broken only by the hum of the damaged engines. She collapsed into her seat, hands still trembling. He appeared moments later, pale but steady. "You did well," he said, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. She gazed up at him, the glowing lines along her skin faint but unwavering. "They'll come for us again." "I know," he replied calmly. But as long as we keep moving, they won't catch us. She gave a slow nod, her determination solidifying. She was no longer the terrified, shattered captive he had first rescued. She had grown, stronger, sharper, and unwilling to return to that life. Together, they began the task of restoring the ship. It was no small feat, but they worked as one, united by survival and an emerging trust. For the first time, freedom didn't feel like a distant fantasy. It was real and worth defending. She was prepared to fight for it. The ship drifted in the relative safety of deep space, but they both understood it was temporary. The slaver's ship may have taken damage, but it wouldn't deter them for long. The slaver network would come, not just for her now, but for him as well. As she watched him tirelessly repairing the vessel's systems, guilt stirred in her chest. "You should have left me behind," she murmured, her bioluminescent patterns dimming slightly. He paused, then looked back at her. "Why would you think I could do that?" "You're putting everything at risk," she said, dropping her gaze. "They won't stop hunting us." "Maybe not," he agreed, turning back to his tools. "But I've made my decision. The real question is, what decision will you make?" She didn't answer right away. Her thoughts raced. Every instinct told her to flee, to hide, to survive at any cost, but something inside her had shifted since he'd freed her. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was fighting. For herself, for her people, and for the fragile connection forming between them. She was done running. Later, in the stillness of the ship's common area, they sat together. A star map glowed faintly between them, casting soft blue light over their faces. "There," she said, pointing to a distant system, far from any trade routes. "That's where my people were taken from. Some might still be alive." He studied the map with a serious expression. "That region's deep in slaver-controlled space. If we go, we'll be stepping into the lion's den." "I know," she said, meeting his eyes. Her patterns shimmered with resolve. "But I can't run any longer. If there's even a chance to save them, I have to take it." He leaned back, arms folded. "Then we'll need a strategy, something bold enough to shut them down and get your people out." She tilted her head. "You're coming with me?" "Of course," he replied, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. "You didn't think I'd let you have all the excitement, did you?" For the first time in what felt like ages, she smiled. Their plan was simple in theory, but extremely dangerous. They would infiltrate the slaver base using a stolen ship and falsified entry codes acquired from one of his old contacts. Once inside, they'd locate any remaining members of her species and sabotage the slavers' operations from within. The journey to the slaver stronghold was filled with tension. Every incoming transmission, every scan made her pulse quicken. But he remained calm, piloting the ship through hostile space with the ease of a veteran. When they arrived, the sight of the base stole her breath. It sprawled across a colossal asteroid, guarded by patrol vessels and automated turrets. It seemed impenetrable. But they had no other choice. The forged codes worked. They docked without raising alarms. She dimmed her glowing skin and cloaked herself to hide her identity. He walked with the air of someone who belonged there, though his hand never strayed far from the blaster at his side. Inside, the base buzzed with cruel efficiency. Slavers barked commands, and prisoners shuffled through dim corridors. The sights and sounds were horribly familiar. She clenched her fists against the urge to flee. "Stay close," he whispered, grounding her. They moved quickly, navigating using a map he'd extracted from the ship's database. It brought them to a holding area lined with containment cells. Her heart ached as she saw her kin, their once vibrant glow dulled by hopelessness. "We'll get them out," he said, already working the lock panel. The doors slid open. The captive stared, too stunned to move. She stepped forward and pulled down her hood. "You're free," she said, voice trembling. "We're here to bring you home." Silence. Then slowly, they stepped out of their cages. The dim lines on their skin began to glow again, faint but growing. Their escape was anything but silent. Alarms rang out. Chaos erupted. She and her companion fought in unison, taking down every guard that stood in their path. Amid the battle, she came face to face with the slaver who had once bound her in chains. He sneered and raised his weapon, but she was faster. Her blade flashed, and he fell, surprise frozen on his face. They reached the hangar. The freed captive scrambled aboard the stolen ship. He rigged the slaver base with charges, setting a countdown. "Are you sure about this?" she asked as he climbed in. "No doubt," he said, offering his hand. "Let's make sure they never forget us." Their ship launched just as the base exploded behind them, a fiery burst tearing through the void. The journey back to her homeworld was long, but filled with quiet hope. The survivors began to recover, sharing memories, stories, and dreams. As they neared the planet, her eyes filled with tears. Bioluminescent forests stretched below, untouched by the nightmares she'd escaped. "You're home," he said softly as they landed. She turned to him, her light bright and full. "You're part of this now. You don't have to leave." He hesitated, then nodded. "Maybe it's time I stopped running too." Together, they stepped into the shimmering light of her world. The battle wasn't over, but for the first time, they truly believed they could make a difference. And so, the hunter and the soldier became something greater, a spark of resistance in a galaxy that desperately needed hope. They had found freedom not only for themselves, but for others, and they had no intention of stopping.